If you have a pair of functioning eyeballs, you know that Monstrous Rage is a problem. And if you've seen my previous video, you might even know why. But now we've done enough complaining, I would like to engage in the much more fun and much more just generally wholesome experience of trying to find out what alternate versions of Monstrous Rage could have existed that maybe would have been a better timeline. And as with a card that really honestly deserves a ban, most versions of this card are going to be a better timeline than this one, simply by virtue of them not being the Monstrous Rage that currently exists. But because this is a design video, I must recognize and reiterate that all of the cards printed for the Magic the Gathering are real cards that were actually printed by real people, which means they are not perfect works of art. They are, in fact, always just whatever the last card was that was in the design file when the creeping specter of the deadline finally made itself known. Some cards are perfect works of art that spring from a designer's mind and stay in the file forever. Some cards are slap jobs that just got put into the file to replace the second coming of Oko that only got axed a week before deadline, and as broken as they are, they're better than what got cut. But with that out of the way, let's start with a quick rundown of what Monstrous Rage is so we can go through for those who maybe don't know. Monstrous Rage is a combat trick, it's mono red, and it's 1 mana. Now, what Monstrous Rage is in a design space is kind of interesting, because around the time that Monstrous Rage was coming out, Wizards of the Coast was really experimenting with +X, +1, and some extra thing cards in red at 2 mana. Now, if you look in modern design skeletons, you can find that we've stabilized somewhere around Haste Magic, which is not a great card, definitely not standard playable, but interesting and kind of powerful in draft. Monstrous Rage makes a lot of sense when you look at it as a card that has been cost dropped from a Haste Magic down to 1 mana, rather than, oh my god, how did they make a 1 mana combat trick that's as powerful as Monstrous Rage is? Because if you look at Haste Magic, it's plus power, +1 toughness at 2 mana, which again, this is a breaking point that I go into in my other video and is important in terms of like the creature that you target potentially surviving, but then it also generates a rectangle, as we say, which is, you know, not necessarily a card in the sense of drawing a card, but it impulses a card off the top. It generates a token that's maybe not a full creature in some way. And if you consider a Wilds of Eldraine roll token a rectangle, then you can see where Monstrous Rage fits into this. Now, my consideration is that I think that there was a point in design where this card straight up existed. I think Monstrous Rage existed as it was at 2 mana with the exact same text. And I would maybe hazard a guess that play design, or whichever stage of design, had been working with the Wilds of Eldraine rolls for so long that they maybe overestimated slightly the impact of not being able to efficiently place a roll token onto the creature that you were Monstrous Raging, and they felt like the roll token wasn't worth the full point of mana, and they said to themselves, okay, Monstrous Rage at 2 mana, we could buff up the power, maybe make it +3/+0 and a monster roll token, or maybe we could bring it down in a mana. We've got to sort of pick between these two things. If the issue that they were wrestling with was the creatures that they're targeting already have roll tokens on them, then Monstrous Rage isn't adding toughness, in which case it behaves like a red 1 mana combat trick because it's only adding power. Now, we in the future know that this was not how things shook out. But I can see how they went, oh, okay, in our playtesting, Monstrous Rage is behaving like a 1 mana spell. So rather than boosting the power and making it stronger as a 2 mana spell, let's bring it down to 1 mana, test it like that. And they discovered that it was powerful at 1 mana, you know, when played onto a fresh creature that didn't have a roll token on it, as we all know. And they went, okay, this is really interesting, we really like playing with this, and they didn't discover how much of a problem that, say, Monstrous Rage onto Monastery Swiftspear was in terms of, like, mathy breakpoint stuff that really you get into when a card has been released and millions and millions and millions of games are being played. So, Monstrous Rage, but 2 mana? Not really that controversial a card. Definitely a card that could have been printed, almost certainly a card that existed in the design file at some point. Relatedly, a card that I have been told multiple times they should have done, Monstrous Rage, exactly the same card, but as a sorcery. I can tell you that this card straight up never existed. Monstrous Rage is a combat trick, it was always a combat trick. The question, like, the role that it is trying to fit in the design skeleton is as a combat trick. It's not an aura that also gives a little bit of bonus power on the turn that you play it. Like, that sort of framing of the card really only, like, you only think of it that way if you're looking at the card from a top-down standard perspective. If you look at Monstrous Rage in the set that it was printed in, it's very clearly red combat trick with set mechanic. So, Sorcery Monstrous Rage didn't exist. It's a bad card. Nobody would ever play it, not even in Wilds of Eldraine draft. As much as that's been proposed to me multiple times, I don't really have more to say about that. Now, something that I brought up in my video is that Monstrous Rage as a combat trick makes a lot of sense if it's in green. And I think that green Monstrous Rage is a card that comes sort of deeply from a place of, I have feelings about the monster role being in red in general. I think through Monstrous Rage's life cycle, we've really, as a player base, come to understand that trample in red is kind of an issue. Like, it kind of really changes the dynamic of how red aggro decks are able to get through their last few bits of damage and consistently end games. Like, there are some percentage points here that need to be shaved off of aggressive red decks that can almost entirely be shaved off them by taking trample out of red. Green Monstrous Rage, however, is just a card that could be printed. When you put a green frame and a green pip on this card, you really see that the only red things about it are the artwork and the fact that it adds +2/+0. Because if we look at green 1 mana combat tricks, we're talking about Snakeskin Veil, which just straight up puts a +1/+1 counter, which is a roll that can be further stacked upon. We're talking about Giant Growth is back in Foundations. Monstrous Rage gives you less power and toughness than Giant Growth when you play it onto a fresh creature. And less power and toughness than Giant Growth, but some of it's a +1/+1 counter, and you get Trample that also stays around, is actually a totally fair sort of like power exchange. You can see that this is in green's power budget, which is the problem that red has, that red has power in other places. It's supposed to lack finishing source. It's supposed to come to green for that finishing source, and green is supposed to go to red for the speed. Monstrous Rage's problem is that it puts the speed with the finishing source in the same color. But while making Monstrous Rage green might be incredibly simple, it is also deeply, deeply cursed, and I think that my favorite and probably most elegant solution to the Monstrous Rage problem is one that I'm surprised that we didn't actually get in the set, which is using the other role tokens available to us. Red has the monster token, but it also has the young hero token, which gets placed by a bunch of other cards. It gets played by Cut In, it gets played by Merry Band. Nope. Merry Bards. It makes sense to put a young hero token onto a creature early on. If we say Monstrous Rage, but it creates a young hero roll instead of a monster roll, what do we get? Well, we get kind of a weird looking card for starters. It doesn't give you a +1/+1 effect unless you play the Monstrous Rage before combat and then can trigger the attack trigger. It plays weirdly with Monastery Swiftspear, who gets fewer triggers because of its high toughness. Although, considering that Monastery Swiftspear's high toughness is a power thing that it's supposed to have payback for, maybe this is more good things. But realistically, the problem is that I can't just port the art from one to the other. So, what I propose is we take the Kindled Fury preprint, Kindled Heroism, and we do a sneaky little swap situation. What we do is we take Monstrous Rage and we replace its text with target creature gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn, scry 1 from Kindled Heroism. And we make Kindled Heroism the uncommon with our boosting effect. It gives a creature +2/+0 and it puts a young hero roll on them. And then we have our beautiful baby-faced boy Kellon just in everybody's faces for the rest of Standard. Now, will this be as good as printed Monstrous Rage? I don't think so. For starters, trample is a big part of the reason that Monstrous Rage works. And also, while a young hero roll is more snowbally, it does allow the creature to repeatedly grow itself up to a full 4 toughness. Monstrous Rage can be played in response to damage-based removal to give a creature an additional point of toughness. This new version of Kindled Heroism can't be used to respond to a Torch the Tower to save your creature. Ultimately, none of these cards exist. My personal favorite is the Monstrous Rage Kindled Heroism swap, and absolutely the most cursed is Green Monstrous Rage, but I would love to hear people's thoughts. I would love to hear people's alternate versions of the card, and I would just love to hear what kind of cards you'd like me to talk about in the future, after, of course, you've given me a like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video.